Captain Elias Ward had seen many strange worlds in his years as a deep space pilot, but none of them had tried so hard to kill his ship before he even landed. His vessel, Stellar Wind, shook violently as alarms screamed in his ears. Warning lights painted the control room in red and yellow. Smoke curled from the main console, and the artificial gravity flickered on and off, making him feel like he was falling in every direction at once. "Come on, girl," Elias muttered to the ship, gripping the manual controls. "Hold together for me just a little longer." The navigation screen showed a green and blue planet below, large oceans and vast stretches of forest. It looked safe enough, if he could reach it in one piece. But the ship's main engine was gone, destroyed by a sudden burst of high energy, particles from a nearby star. The backup systems were failing too. He had only one choice left: crash land and hope to survive. Elias locked the coordinates on a wide green valley near the edge of a river. With a deep breath, he cut the failing thrusters and let gravity take over. The stellar wind roared through the planet's atmosphere, the hull heating up until the air outside glowed orange. The shaking grew worse. A piece of the right wing tore away, spinning into the sky. Elias fought the controls, teeth clenched, eyes fixed on the fast-approaching ground. The last thing he heard before impact was the deep groan of stressed metal. Then the world became a blur of noise and light. When Elias woke, everything was silent except for the soft hiss of cooling metal. The front window of the ship was cracked but still holding. The smell of burnt circuits filled the air. His head throbbed, but his body was mostly unharmed, thanks to the crash couch and the ship's emergency shields. Slowly, he unbuckled his straps and pushed the emergency hatch open. Warm, fresh air rushed in, carrying the scent of flowers and damp earth. He stepped outside and froze. The valley was beautiful in a way that almost didn't feel real. Tall trees with silver leaves swayed in a gentle breeze. Their trunks glowed faintly as sunlight reflected off tiny crystal-like patterns in the bark. Strange birds with long, ribbon-like tails glided through the air, singing in soft, musical tones. The river nearby sparkled under the twin suns that hung in the sky. For a moment, Elias forgot he had just survived a crash. Then he remembered his situation: no working ship, no way to contact anyone, and no idea if the local life forms were friendly. He grabbed a survival pack from the wreck and began checking the area. His training told him to find shelter, food, and water first. The river was close, good for water. The forest might hide edible plants, but shelter, he'd have to work on that. Then he heard it, a soft, rhythmic sound, like footsteps moving through the grass. Elias turned, hand instinctively reaching for the small plasma cutter at his belt. Out of the trees, a figure appeared, tall, graceful, and unlike anything he had seen before. It was a woman, or at least, she looked like one. Her skin was a pale shade of teal, smooth and flawless. Her hair, long and flowing, shimmered with strands of deep blue and green. Her clothing was made of a light silvery fabric that caught the sunlight. She moved with a kind of quiet elegance, each step careful but confident. She stopped a few meters away, studying him with wide, curious eyes the color of bright amber. Elias tried to speak. Hello?" The woman tilted her head slightly, as if listening to the sound of his voice. Then she said something in a melodic language he didn't understand. "I don't speak your language," he said, pointing to himself. "Elias." He tapped his chest. "Elias." She repeated the sound slowly. "Elias." Then, with a small smile, she took a step closer. Elias noticed she had no visible weapons, though her posture was alert, ready to move quickly if needed. From behind her, more figures emerged from the forest. All women, all sharing that same soft, natural beauty, though their skin tones ranged from pale teal to warm golden bronze. They wore different styles of clothing, some decorated with crystal beads, others with intricate patterns. Each of them looked at him with the same mix of surprise and wonder, as if he were a rare and precious sight. One of them, taller than the rest and wearing a crown-like circlet, stepped forward. She spoke firmly to the others, then addressed Elias. Her voice was calm but carried authority. Elias could only guess she was asking who he was and why he was here. He tried to answer in simple words, pointing at the broken ship and miming an explosion, then motioning to the sky. The women exchanged glances, whispering to each other. Finally, the tall one gave an order. 2 women approached Elias, gesturing for him to follow. Their movements were polite, but there was no mistaking it. He was being escorted. They led him through the forest toward the city he had glimpsed from the air before the crash. The path was smooth, lined with plants that gave off a faint golden light. When they emerged from the trees, Elias stopped in awe. The city was built of white stone that shimmered faintly under the twin suns. Towering spires rose into the sky, connected by delicate bridges. Waterways ran through the streets, catching the sunlight in 1,000 bright reflections. Everywhere he looked, there were only women, walking, talking, laughing, working. The air was filled with the hum of activity, but as soon as people saw him, the noise quieted. Dozens of eyes turned toward him. Some faces showed curiosity, others shock, and a few looked almost fearful. The tall woman who seemed to be the leader turned to him and said something slowly, as if trying to bridge the language gap. Elias couldn't understand, but the meaning was clear enough from her tone and the way the crowd reacted. Whatever she had said, it had changed the atmosphere instantly. Murmurs swept through the gathered people, and Elias caught the way some of them looked at him, not just with interest, but with a kind of claim. In that moment, he realized 2 things. First, this planet was unlike any he had ever seen. Second, for some reason he was the only man here, and that made him important, maybe too important. Elias walked through the great gates of the city with the tall, crown-wearing woman leading the way. The smooth white stone beneath his boots felt warm from the sunlight. Water from the nearby canals made a soft rushing sound, and the air smelled, faintly, of sweet flowers. Everywhere he looked, alien women paused in their work to watch him. Some whispered behind their hands, others stared openly, and a few even smiled. The variety among them was striking. Different shades of skin from soft teal to deep bronze, different heights and builds, different styles of clothing decorated with crystal beads, metalwork, or shimmering cloth. But all shared that same soft, natural beauty and an elegance in the way they moved. Elias had spent years traveling between colonies and alien outposts, but never in his life had he seen an entire civilization made up only of women. The realization was strange enough. The way they looked at him made it stranger. It wasn't just curiosity. It was something sharper, like recognition mixed with urgency. The tall leader stopped before a wide staircase that led into a massive hall. She turned, speaking a few words to the women who had escorted him. They gave small nods and stepped aside, letting him walk up the stairs with her. Inside, the hall was bright and airy. The ceiling was high, supported by pillars carved with twisting patterns of plants and stars. Sunlight streamed through tall crystal windows, scattering rainbow light on the polished floor. At the far end stood a raised platform with a semicircle of cushioned seats. The leader motioned for Elias to stand in the center. She took one of the seats, and soon several other women entered, older in appearance, wearing robes that marked them as people of importance. They spoke to each other in the melodic language Elias couldn't understand, though they often glanced at him as they talked. Finally, the leader addressed him directly. She spoke slowly, as though hoping he might understand at least part of her meaning. Elias tapped his chest again. "Elias!" he said clearly. From another world. He pointed upward toward the ceiling, then made an explosion motion with his hands and pointed to the direction of the crash site. One of the robed women with silver-streaked hair and a thoughtful expression leaned forward. She picked up a small crystal device from a nearby table and pressed a button. The crystal glowed faintly, and a soft hum filled the room. Then she spoke into it, and a mechanical voice replied in broken but understandable English. Name, source, arrival? Elias blinked. A translator. Not perfect, but better than hand gestures. He explained slowly about the damaged stellar wind, about the particle burst, and about making an emergency landing. The women listened intently. When he finished, the leader spoke into the crystal. The translation came. You are first of your kind, to walk on Lithara, in many generations. Elias frowned. First of my kind. You mean humans? The leader nodded. Then she said something else into the crystal. The reply made him pause. Our world has no men, not for 300 years. He felt the weight of those words settle on him. No men? None at all? That explained the strange looks, the whispering, the attention. But before he could ask more, the crystal spoke again. Your arrival changes balance, changes all. The leader's tone grew sharper, almost warning. Elias glanced around the room and noticed a tension he hadn't felt before. It wasn't fear exactly. It was more like the air before a storm, when everyone knows something is about to happen. Later, they brought him to a guest chamber in one of the tall towers. It had a wide balcony overlooking the city, a bed covered in soft fabric, and a table with food laid out. Fruits shaped like spirals, bread with a faint golden sheen, and a clear drink that smelled like mint. He sat at the table trying to think. The planet was beautiful. The people seemed polite, but something about the way they treated him felt political. Not just a welcome for a traveler, but as if he were a prize to be claimed. From the balcony, Elias could see groups of women in the streets below talking animatedly and pointing toward the tower. Some carried banners marked with symbols, a silver bird, a sapphire circle, a golden flame. A knock sounded at the door. 2 women entered, not the robed officials from before, but dressed in armor made of layered metal plates. One had sharp eyes and short hair. The other carried a staff tipped with crystal. The short-haired one spoke into a smaller crystal device. The translation was rough but clear. You must come with us. Our clan will protect you. Elias raised an eyebrow. Your clan? Steel Wing Clan, the device translated. Others want you. We take you first. Before Elias could answer, another voice called from the hallway. A different pair of women appeared, wearing flowing blue robes embroidered with silver. Patterns. One of them held her own translation crystal. Do not go, the voice said. Sapphire Clan offers safety. More than they ever can. The 2 groups glared at each other, speaking rapidly in Litharan. Elias didn't need a translator to see what was happening. They were fighting over him right in his doorway. He stepped back, mind racing. If the city had different clans and 2 of them were already competing for him within hours of his arrival, then his presence was stirring up something big, something dangerous. Listen, Elias said, holding up his hands. I'm not choosing anything. I just need to fix my ship and leave. The words meant little to them without translation, but his tone seemed to carry enough meaning for both groups to hesitate. The Sapphire women gave the Steel Wing women one last cold stare before leaving. The armored pair stayed by his door for a while, but eventually they too stepped out. When the room was quiet again, Elias let out a long breath. He didn't know what game he'd stumbled into, but it was clear now. This wasn't just a city without men. It was a city ready to fight. Over the first one they'd seen in centuries, and he was right in the middle of it. The asteroid field faded behind them, the jagged rocks growing smaller until they vanished into the endless black. Captain Rourke kept the silver wings steady, but his mind was far from calm. The hunters were not gone. They were only delayed. Soraya sat in the co-pilot's seat, still wrapped in her blanket, her gaze locked on the star field ahead. Her eyes didn't blink often, as though she was waiting for something to emerge from the darkness. "You've seen them before," Rourke said, quietly. "Haven't you?" She turned her head slowly, her expression heavy. "Yes." It was one of the few standard words she had learned well. She hesitated, then began speaking in her own language, hands moving slightly to help him understand. Through a mix of gestures and scattered words, Rourke pieced together the truth. Soraya's people, the Packborn, traveled together in small fleets of living ships. Each pack was like a family, bound by trust and shared survival. They rarely left each other's side. The hunters had been their enemy for generations. They didn't just attack to steal resources, they hunted for sport. A pack's unity was its strength, but if scattered, Packborn were vulnerable. The hunters knew this. They targeted leaders first, breaking the bonds that kept the group strong. Soraya's pack had been traveling near a nebula when the hunters struck. Her ship was damaged, and she was separated from the others in the chaos. She had escaped in the pod only because her pack's captain, her own sister, had ordered her to flee. Rourke listened without interrupting. The pain in Soraya's voice was clear, even without knowing all the words. When she mimed an explosion and then spread her fingers like drifting ash, he understood what had happened to the others. For a while, silence filled the cockpit. The hum of the engines was the only sound. "You think the hunters followed you from that battle?" Rourke finally asked. She nodded. "No pack. Easy prey." Rourke clenched his jaw. He wasn't sure if she was talking about herself or about both of them now. He leaned back in his chair. "Well, they're going to learn something about humans. We're not easy prey either." A small smile touched Soraya's lips, brief but genuine. They traveled on, heading toward the coordinates she had given him, a distant system hidden in a cluster of uncharted worlds. According to Soraya, there might be another surviving pack. There, one that had stayed out of the hunter's path. The journey was slow. The Silver Wing was built for hauling cargo, not for outrunning warships. Every few hours, Rourke ran a deep scan. The hunter's signal didn't appear again, but he didn't trust that. Predators didn't always chase directly. Sometimes they waited. On the third day, they passed through the edge of a dying star's debris field. Great chunks of rock and metal drifted silently, glowing faintly from the radiation. Soraya stood at the observation window, her eyes scanning the wreckage. Suddenly, she stiffened. "Hunter Mark," she whispered. Rourke joined her. At first, he saw nothing unusual. Then he spotted it, a large piece of twisted hull with a dark emblem scorched into it, a curved blade-like shape, unmistakably alien. Felt a chill. "Looks like they've been here." Soraya nodded, but her gaze had shifted to something else. A smaller piece of wreckage tumbling slowly. She touched the glass, her voice trembling as she spoke in her language. "What is it?" Rourke asked. She closed her eyes, then said in halting standard, "From my pack." Rourke's stomach tightened. That wreckage meant the hunters had passed through this sector recently. If Soraya's surviving kin were truly hiding in the system ahead, their safety was already in question. He adjusted their course slightly, pushing the Silver Wing harder. The engines groaned, but he didn't slow. Soraya moved to sit beside him again, this time without her blanket. She leaned forward, pointing at the navigation display, tracing an alternate route that curved through. "A narrow corridor between two nebula storms. That's risky," Rourke said, studying the map. Those storms can fry a ship's systems. She met his eyes steadily. Hide from hunters. He exhaled slowly. All right, let's try it. Hours later, they entered the nebula corridor. The gas. Clouds glowed faintly outside, swirling in strange patterns. Static hissed over the comms, and the radar flickered with interference. Rourke kept his hands tight on the controls, adjusting constantly to keep them on course. Soraya stayed close, occasionally tapping the console when she sensed a shift in the nebula currents. Her instincts seemed almost in tune with space itself. Then, without warning, a faint blip appeared on the edge of the radar. It was weak, distorted by the nebula, but it was moving. Rourke's pulse quickened. "We've got company." Soraya leaned over the display. She stared at the blip, her face going pale. "Hunter." The ship outside didn't come in fast. Instead, it mirrored their pace, keeping just far enough away to stay hidden in the interference. "They're waiting for us to leave the nebula," Rourke guessed. "They want open space to strike." Soraya's hand curled into a fist. She spoke in her language, the words sharp. Rourke didn't know the exact translation, but he understood the meaning. She didn't want to run anymore. "We'll deal with them," he said firmly. "But not here. We use the nebula to our advantage." By the time they reached the other side, the glow of the storms faded, and the stars shone bright again. The hunter vessel emerged moments later, closing the distance. Rourke pushed the Silver Wing into a shallow dive toward a nearby moon, its surface covered in jagged cliffs. The hunters followed, but their larger craft couldn't match his maneuverability in the tight turns. He guided the hauler between two cliff faces so narrow he almost scraped the hull. The hunter ship tried to follow, and clipped one of its wings on the rock. Soraya let out a sharp breath, a small flash of satisfaction in her eyes. "That's one problem slowed down," Rourke said. "But they're not done. We've got to keep moving." As they left the moon's shadow, Soraya's gaze drifted to the stars again. In a voice so quiet he barely heard it, she said, "Last pack must live." Rourke glanced at her, then back at the controls. "Then we'll make sure they do, no matter what's waiting out there." Somewhere in the dark, the hunters were still watching. But now, Rourke wasn't just flying to escape. He was flying towards something worth protecting, and he wasn't about to let the shadows in the stars take it away. The Silver Wing drifted just beyond the jagged moon's shadow, its engines running at low power to avoid detection. Captain Rourke sat in the pilot's seat, staring at the empty space ahead. He knew it wasn't truly empty. Somewhere out there, the hunters were waiting. Soraya stood at the observation window, her hands pressed lightly to the glass. The starlight made her rich teal skin glow softly, but her eyes were fixed and sharp. She was listening in her own way, not to sound, but to the subtle movements of space around them. "They won't give up," she said quietly in Standard. "Hunters never stop until prey is gone." Rourke leaned back in his chair. "Then, maybe we stop being prey." She turned to him, tilting her head. "Fight?" He nodded slowly. "We can't outrun them forever. And if your last pack is out there hiding, they'll find them too. We need to hit them before they reach the others." Soraya hesitated, then stepped closer. "Danger. My pack now. If you fight, I fight." Rourke plotted a new course, one that would take them through a narrow stretch of space known for unstable gravity fields. Most captains avoided it, but to him it was perfect. If the hunters followed, he could use the dangerous terrain to his advantage. As the Silver Wing accelerated, Soraya moved to the co-pilot's seat. She no longer sat quietly as before. Now she leaned forward, scanning the displays, learning the way he read sensor data and star maps. "You've picked up a lot since I found you," Rourke said. She gave a small smile. "Learn to survive." A few hours later, the sensors picked up movement behind them, a hunter vessel. the same one they had clipped on the moon, was on approach. Its damage was patched, and it was faster than before. Rourke tightened his grip on the controls. "They're coming in hot." Soraya's gaze hardened. "They want you to run." "Well," Rourke said, "we're going to give them something better." He pushed the engines to full power, heading straight into the unstable gravity zone. The stars outside began to warp and shift as the pull of nearby collapsed asteroids twisted the light. The navigation computer gave constant warnings, but Rourke ignored most of them. The hunter ship followed, its dark hull cutting through the starlight. It was larger, heavier, but its weapons were already warming up. Energy pulses flashed past the silver wing, forcing Rourke to weave through space in sharp, sudden moves. Soraya's hands gripped the edge of the console. She wasn't afraid now. She was alert, tracking the enemy's movements. "They aim for engines," she said. "They cripple, then take." "That's not going to happen," Rourke replied. He spotted a cluster of small gravity wells ahead, invisible to the eye, but strong enough to drag a ship off course. If he timed it right, he could slingshot around one and make the hunters overshoot. "Hold on," he warned. The silver wing dove toward the nearest well. The ship shuddered as the pull caught it, dragging them sideways. Rourke used the momentum, flipping the ship in a tight curve that nearly scraped the hull. The hunter vessel tried to follow but misjudged the distance. The pull caught its wing, spinning it off course. For a moment, Rourke thought it might slam into one of the collapsed asteroids, but the hunters regained control at the last second. "They're good," Rourke muttered. "Too good," Soraya glanced at him. "We make them angry. Angry. Make mistakes." Rourke smiled faintly. "I like the way you think." They pushed deeper into the unstable zone. The gravity wells grew stronger, some of them tugging at the silver wing so hard that alarms blared. Outside the viewport, bits of old shipwrecks drifted, evidence of others who had failed to pass through. The hunters closed the gap again, their weapons firing in short bursts. One pulse struck near the rear, shaking the ship violently. "Damage to aft plating," Rourke reported, scanning the systems. "Nothing we can't handle." Soraya pointed at the map, tracing a line toward 2 overlapping gravity wells. "Trap them here." He looked at the spot and nodded. "All right, but it's going to be tight." They approached the twin wells, their combined pull distorting the space between them into a shimmering funnel. Rourke angled the silver wing straight for the gap. The hunters, eager to finish the chase, followed closely. At the last second, Rourke veered sharply to the right, skimming the edge of one well's pull. The ship groaned but held. The hunters, committed to the center path, were caught in the stronger pull between both wells. Their ship spun wildly, alarms echoing through their comms as they struggled to break free. Soraya watched the scene, her lips pressed in a thin line. "Not destroyed," she said. "They will come again." "Yeah," Rourke agreed, steering them out of the zone. "But now they know we're not running scared." When they were finally clear, Rourke eased the engines down. The unstable zone faded behind them, replaced by a calmer stretch of stars. For a moment, it almost felt peaceful. Soraya leaned back in her seat, exhaling slowly. "You fight. Like Packborn, Captain." "That's a compliment, right?" Rourke asked. She nodded. "Very much." He smiled briefly, but his mind was already on the next move. "We'll reach your last pack soon, but if the hunters are this persistent, we'll need to be ready for a bigger fight." That night, they ate together in the small galley. Soraya was quieter than usual, her thoughts far away. Finally, she said, "When we find my pack, you stay?" Rourke looked at her for a long moment. "If you want me to." She didn't answer, right away. Instead, she pulled her blanket tighter around her shoulders and gave a small, certain nod. They both knew the hunters wouldn't stop. But now, they had chosen their path, one that went straight toward danger, not away from it, and Rourke had the strange, unshakable feeling that they were walking into the heart of the hunter's path, together. The station's alarm blared, sharp and urgent, filling every corridor with the sound of danger. Captain Elias froze for a moment, his mind racing. Lyra was beside him, her sharp alien ears twitching toward the distant rumble. She had been tense all morning, as if she had felt this coming. "Docking bay breach," the computer's voice announced. "Unauthorized entry detected." Elias's heart sank. He didn't need the details to know it was them, the hunters who had been chasing Lyra across the stars. "Come on," he said, grabbing his rifle and motioning for her to follow. Lyra's steps were quick but silent. She stayed close, her eyes scanning every shadow. Elias had seen fear in soldiers before, but this was different. This was the kind of fear born from memories too fresh to fade. As they reached the main hall, the emergency lights turned red. The usual hum of the station's machinery was drowned out by heavy metal footsteps. They echoed, closer and closer. "They are here," Lyra whispered. Elias nodded. "Then we make our stand." He took cover behind a support beam and peeked around the corner. Through the haze of steam from ruptured pipes, he saw them, tall, armored figures with sleek silver masks and glowing eyes. The mercenaries moved like a single organism, their weapons aimed with perfect coordination. Lyra trembled but didn't run. She pressed her palm against the wall, eyes closing for just a moment. "They are talking to each other. I can hear it." "You can understand them?" Elias asked. She nodded. "They think you are only helping me for reward. They think humans are weak." Elias allowed himself a dry laugh. "Then let's prove them wrong." The first shots came fast. Sparks flew as bullets and plasma bolts struck the bulkheads. Elias returned fire, aiming carefully. Two of the mercenaries went down, but more were coming in from the other side. The battle became chaos. Pipes burst, showering the hall in steam. Metal screeched as stray shots tore through the structure. Lyra stayed behind cover, calling out positions to Elias in quick bursts. Her voice was steady now, her fear turning into sharp focus. "Left side!" she warned. Elias swung his rifle, catching the attacker before they could flank him. Still, it was clear they couldn't hold this position forever. The mercenaries were trained for this, wearing them down, pushing them into a corner. "They are not here to capture me," Lyra suddenly said, horror in her voice. "They are here to erase me. No witness, no trace." That meant they'd kill Elias, too. Elias gritted his teeth. "Then we'll have to disappear before they finish the job." He activated his wrist comm. "Station control, seal Section C and vent the atmosphere in the hall." The operator on the other end hesitated. "Captain, that section is occupied." "Do it now!" Elias barked. The emergency doors slammed shut. A deep hiss filled the hall as the air began to drain. The mercenaries realized too late what was happening. Some tried to retreat, others braced themselves, but the sudden change in pressure made even their advanced armor strain. Elias grabbed Lyra's hand and pulled her toward the maintenance hatch. They squeezed inside just as the hall's viewports shattered, sucking the mercenaries out into the cold void. The silence that followed was deafening. They crawled through the narrow maintenance tunnel until they reached a sealed storage bay. Only then did they stop to catch their breath. Lyra sat on the floor, her back against a crate, her chest rising and falling rapidly. "You saved me again," she said quietly. Elias shook his head. "No, you helped me survive too. That's what a team does." But before they could rest, a soft beep came from his comm. A new message appeared, marked urgent. It was from an old contact in the human fleet, Elias. "If you have the alien, you need to move. The bounty on her just doubled, and it's not just mercenaries anymore. Entire factions are coming." Elias stared at the message, his jaw tightening. "Looks like the galaxy just got smaller for us." Lyra's eyes met his. "Then we will just have to fight smarter." And in that moment, Elias realized something. She wasn't just a passenger he was protecting. She was becoming part of his pack. The Silverwing moved swiftly through the dark star field, its engines pushing the limits of their worn-out frame. Captain Rourke's eyes flicked constantly between the navigation console and the forward viewport. The hunter's dark ship was closing fast behind them, its weapons charged and ready. Soraya sat beside him, her face set with determination. No longer frightened, she was calm and steady, like a warrior preparing for battle. "We cannot outrun them much longer," Rourke said quietly. "This ends soon," Soraya nodded. "If they find last pack, all lost. We fight now." Rourke gripped the controls tighter. "Then we give them a fight they will never forget." Ahead was the small hidden moon where Soraya said the last of her pack waited, a place shielded by thick nebula clouds and a ring of sharp asteroids. It was risky to enter, but it was their only chance. Rourke adjusted course, steering the Silverwing toward the moon's shadow. The ship shuddered as it dropped behind the asteroid ring. Soraya's eyes shone with a mix of hope and fear. "Do you think they can survive?" Rourke asked. She looked out the window, voice low. "They must. If we fail, everything is lost." The hunter's vessel appeared suddenly at the edge of the asteroid belt, dark and menacing. Its engines flared as it accelerated, weapons glowing ominously. Rourke slammed the throttle forward, weaving through the dense field of jagged rocks. The ship groaned, but he pushed it harder than ever before. Energy blasts zipped past, striking the hull with sparks and fire. Alarms screamed. Soraya gritted her teeth. "They want to destroy us here." "We won't let them," Rourke growled. The chase became a deadly dance. Rourke twisted the Silverwing through narrow gaps, dodging blasts and debris. Soraya watched the hunter's movements closely, calling out directions in a strange mix of her language and broken standard. "They make mistake," she said. "Too sure." Rourke saw the opening, a narrow passage between two giant asteroids that the bigger hunter ship could not follow. He veered sharply, slipping through while the hunters slammed into a rock face, shaking violently. Soraya smiled, briefly. Good. Once inside the shadow of the moon, Rourke shut down most systems to avoid detection. They drifted silently, cloaked by the dense nebula clouds. "Now," Soraya whispered, "we prepare." They sent a quiet signal to the hidden pack's base, a faint pulse that only the packborn would recognize. Within minutes, several small ships emerged from the shadows, sleek and fast, moving to surround the Silverwing. Soraya's people had survived, but they were few. Scarred and wary, their eyes shone with the fire of those who had lost much but refused to give up. Rourke stood and looked at them. "We fight together," he said. The hunters arrived, their ship breaking through the nebula like a dark predator. Their weapons lit the sky as they opened fire on the packborn fleet. Rourke's heart pounded as the battle erupted around them. The small packborn ships darted and weaved, striking quickly then vanishing into the asteroid shadows. The Silverwing was no warship, but Rourke used every trick he knew, sudden turns, hidden maneuvers, and the dangerous terrain, to keep them alive. Amid the chaos, Soraya climbed to the communications console. She began coordinating the packborn ships, her voice strong and clear. "Focus on their engines," she ordered. "Cut off their power." The packborn responded with fierce precision. Explosions lit the void as hunter ships began to falter. Rourke smiled grimly. "That's it. Hit them where it hurts." The battle raged for what felt like hours. The hunters fought with ruthless skill, but the packborn had something the hunters underestimated: unity. Rourke watched Soraya, her eyes fierce, shouting commands, inspiring her people. The human pilot and the alien warrior fought side by side, their trust unshakable. As the last hunter cruiser faltered, caught between asteroids and plasma fire, Rourke took one final risk. He piloted the Silver Wing in a daring run straight toward the Hunter flagship, distracting its weapons long enough for a pack-borne ship to strike its reactor core. The flagship exploded in a bright burst, sending shards of metal spinning into space. Silence fell over the battlefield. The remaining Hunter ships fled or surrendered. Soraya turned to Rourke, exhaustion and relief shining in her eyes. "We live. Because of you." Rourke shook his head. "Because of us. Together." She smiled softly and leaned against him. For the first time since he found her drifting alone in space, she seemed at peace. The war was not over, but the last pack had survived. Rourke knew the galaxy would still be dangerous, but with Soraya and her people by his side, he was ready for whatever came next. And as she nestled close against him that night, he felt the true meaning of pack. Not just blood or kind, but trust, strength, and hope. The battle was over, but the stars still felt heavy with silence. Captain Rourke sat in the pilot's chair of the Silver Wing, his hands resting on the worn controls. Soraya was beside him, her breathing steady as she watched the distant nebula. Clouds drift slowly past the viewport. For the first time in weeks, there was no urgent danger, no alarms blaring, no hunters chasing them through space. Rourke turned to Soraya. "We made it." She smiled softly, her amber eyes warm and calm. "Yes, last pack safe for now." He nodded, knowing the hunters might return someday. But for now, the immediate threat was gone. The hidden base where Soraya's people had taken refuge was a quiet place, carved inside a hollowed moon. The air was thick with the scent of ionized gas and distant electrical hums from the small ships docked nearby. Rourke stepped out of the Silver Wing, feeling the weight of exhaustion in his bones. Soraya stayed close, her hand brushing his arm lightly, a simple gesture that had grown into a deep comfort. "This place," Rourke said, looking around. "It's a good home." Soraya nodded. "Safe, but fragile." He glanced at her, sensing the unspoken worry beneath her calm words. The scars of loss were still fresh, and rebuilding would take time. In the following days, Rourke helped the Packborn repair their damaged ships and strengthen their defenses. He shared human technology and tactics, while Soraya taught him about the Packborn's unique abilities, how they could sense danger, communicate without words, and move silently through space. Their bond grew stronger with every shared challenge. At night, Soraya would nestle close beside him, finding comfort in the presence of someone who no longer treated her as an alien, but as part of a new pack, a family. One evening, as the two stood watching the stars from the moon's surface, Soraya spoke softly. "Rourke, before you found me, I was lost, alone." He reached out and took her hand gently. "You're not alone anymore." She smiled, but a shadow passed over her face. "I fear the hunters will return. They will not give up." "We'll be ready," Rourke promised. Together. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, the stars seemed to shine just a little brighter. Time passed, and the Packborn began to heal. New ships were built, alliances formed with nearby colonies, and the survivors learned to trust again. Rourke found himself no longer just a pilot or a captain. He was part of something bigger. Soraya had changed him too. She was no longer the frightened alien he had found drifting in a pod. She was a leader, a warrior, and a friend. One quiet night, Soraya and Rourke sat side by side inside the Silver Wing, looking out into the vastness of space. She rested her head on his shoulder, the soft teal of her skin warm against his own. "You saved me," she whispered. He smiled gently. "No, we saved each other." She closed her eyes, breathing in the calm. "I lost my pack, but now I have a new one. "And I have you," Rourke said, his voice steady and sure. The galaxy was still dangerous, and the hunters were out there, waiting. But for now they had peace, a chance to build, to heal, to stand together. And as Soraya nestled against him every night, Rourke knew this was more than survival. It was hope. They were a pack, chosen, united, and unbreakable.